And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie along with Mark Shaw. We'll get your calls this hour as well. Mark, can you believe it's been 60 years? 60 years.
No, I can't. And I think we should remember, George, today to celebrate some of JFK. Unfortunately, he's one of those people who people remember more about his death and the assassination and everything than what he did. I mean, he was an advocate of civil rights, he and Bobby. He saved us, both of them, I think, from a nuclear war with the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was a war hero. You know, that's not what your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. I mean, he was a leader. The charisma, of course, all that. So in some ways, I wish we celebrated more what his life was about and obviously what he lost and the two young children and Jackie and all of that. But he's more well known, and it doesn't matter. It seems like, you know, I hear from people all over the world, and hopefully I'll hear from them who
I'm losing you on the phone, Mark.
What's that?
I'm losing you on the phone.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there you go. And
yeah.
So, you know, there's still extreme interest in JFK, but most of it has to do with how he died. And, you know, this whole connection I wanted to mention to you between Dorothy Kilgallen, who we've talked about before, the columnist in New York City, syndicated to 200 newspapers across the country, the star of the CBS quiz show, What's My Line, radio show listened to by 1 million people and all of that. She and JFK were very good friends. He had been to her home. They'd played charades. They'd been to some of the social clubs in New York City and everything. And so when JFK invited her to the White House with her son, Kerry, who was in the third grade, she was so excited. They got there. Pierre Salinger set up the meeting in the library. And JFK came in. He made a big fuss over the letters that Kerry had brought from his third-grade class, gave him a PT 109 pin and all of that. So when the first column that Dorothy wrote about JFK's death, I think it was 2 days afterwards, and she wrote that, what comes to mind for me, the picture is a tall man stooping over a little boy, making a fuss over the letters that he brought from his third-grade class. This is the man who was assassinated in Dallas. And, boy, from that point on, she flew to Dallas. She interviewed the chief of police. She ended up going to the Ruby trial. She ended up being in the front row and listening to testimony by Ruby that he would be there when Oswald was being transported. Then, of course, she hit the star of all of it. Out of 400 reporters at the trial, she was the only one to represent Jack Ruby, to interview Jack Ruby. And we don't know what he told her because she ended up being killed because she was the reporter who knew much, as we'll talk about. But one of the things that I want to tell you that she was able to do when she went to New Orleans was to confirm that, and people have always said, where's the connection between Marcello and Jack Ruby? Well, what I was able to learn from the news sources in the last few months is that the same dancers who danced at the Carousel Club, which was owned by Ruby, danced at the Showgirl Club in New Orleans, which was owned by Marcello and his brother.
Jeez.
And I was able to find out that Ruby hung out there a great deal and became a best friend with Marcello's brother. Also, Joe Campisi, who was Marcello's henchman in Dallas, was the first person to visit Ruby in jail, and that Ruby had dinner the night before he shot Oswald at the Egyptian Club, which was owned by Marcello, and in fact, Marcello owned the Carousel Club.
What was Ruby's motivation for that? And I've always been told he died of cancer. Did he have cancer prior to that and know he was going to die?
Well, there are a lot of suspicions there, and as you know, I was privileged to practice law with Melvin Belli, who represented Ruby. The motivation, I think he was ordered to do it. You know, I want to go back to Hoover for just a second. Just think about this now, what he's done. He shouted to the world, Oswald alone. He's stolen the body. He's confiscated the files. Now he has to appoint a commission so that nobody else is going to investigate. And so he's done that, and he's buttoned it up with the slam dunk Oswald alone conclusion. So who's the only loose end there? And that's obviously got to be Dorothy Kilgallen. In those audio tapes that I mentioned, they discuss Dorothy Kilgallen, and they better get the commission organized and in business before the dirty columnist on the East Coast blows this wide open in her newspaper.
Amazing.
So right away, you know, she Hoover knew that she was on the job. In fact, the first column she ever wrote was the Oswald file must not close, and I could read you some excerpts, but just think about what Hoover would have thought if he'd read this paragraph. Justice is a big rug. When you pull it out from under one man, a lot of others fall too. That's why so many people are saying there's something queer about the killing of Oswald by Ruby, something strange about the case was handled, and the Oswald file must not close. She wrote about 15 columns, and when Hoover read the one about her saying that Curry told her that he sent his men to the overpass, I have the document from the National Archives where he wrote in capital letters in his own hand, "Wrong, wrong, wrong. Throw this away. Wrong." So she was she was a target of his for sure. She's the only loose end now, George, because he's buttoned up everything else, and he finds out she's going to New Orleans. She goes there. She finds out about Marcello. She comes back to New York. She's a blabbermouth. I'm going to solve the JFK assassination. I know who killed the president and who covered it up, Marcello and Hoover. And she tells her hairdresser, if the wrong people knew what I know about the JFK assassination would cost me my life, I'm buying a gun, and 2 weeks later she's dead.
She's dead, exactly. Let's go to some of the calls. Todd in Bellevue, Washington, you're on with us, Todd. Go ahead.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, I would like to ask you about Mr. Mark Grobert, why he doesn't believe that Dorothy Kilgallen is, as you say, he said she was blowing alcohol. But the real question I want to ask you is if you believe that Joseph P. Kennedy could have been murdered. It's like the Kennedys went to England as a toast to the town in World War II, and Joseph P. Kennedy had to be fired as English ambassador because he was such a supporter of Hitler. So I'd like to know if you believe that Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. could have been set up by the military to die.
Well, if he was killed, I don't think it would have been by the military. I think it would have been by by Marcello and his cohorts who Joe double-crossed, because when they called those guys in, Frank Sinatra was the go-between, Sam Giancana, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, all of them, helped him win the election by winning Illinois and West Virginia, with Joe promising they would leave the mafia alone if they did that. Right away, I had a witness, a primary source witness right there at a breakfast when Joe Kennedy ordered JFK to appoint Bobby Kennedy Attorney General. The first thing he did was go after Marcello and deport him, and tax evasion on Giancana and all of that. But with Joe Kennedy, I don't know if people realize this or not. He wanted to be president of the United States. There's no question.
He did. When he was the ambassador, he wanted to be the president.
But like you said, he got too close to Hitler. So he comes back to the United States and he says, well, if I can't be president, then my sons will be. The one that he wanted to be president was Joe Jr., but he was killed in the war. But I have a statement from someone very close to Joe Kennedy who was told that, look, what I wanted to have happen was Joe Jr. for 4 years, Jack Kennedy for 4 years, Bobby Kennedy for 4 years, and then Ted Kennedy for 4 years. That was what he aspired
to. He wanted a dynasty.
He wanted a dynasty. The photo that I like the most that I found about Joe Kennedy is the moment when Ted Kennedy comes into his room at his home in wherever it was when the assassination took place, and on the front page of the New York Times is JFK dead. And you look at Joe Kennedy had a stroke before that, but he's sitting up and he looks at that paper and he throws it on the floor and he keels over and starts crying.
Yeah.
He knew that he was responsible by his actions for the death of John F. Kennedy.
I think you're absolutely right. Ted, truck driving in Arkansas. Go ahead, Ted.
Yeah, a couple quick ones from Mark. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure thing.
Paul Giancana's book, Double Cross, kind of lays it out. I was wondering what you thought of him setting up Bobby by whacking Marilyn.
Well, I think that Bobby Kennedy, I've proven, was involved in Dorothy's death. You can't mess around with those guys, as I said. I got a kick out of it a couple of days ago when I was asked if I ever feel like I'm in danger. And I say, well, one of the things that has helped me is I've only write about dead people. because I've crossed a lot of people. I get the really strong messages, and I've gotten a couple threats about talking about the Kennedys as I have. But George, I want to say something, and I don't want to forget it. If you would have been on the job in 1963, all the clues were there in terms of this Oswald alone theory being bunk. And you would have looked into that. I don't want you to take this wrong, but you're a modern day Dorothy Kilgallen as a reporter and a man of the truth, while she was a woman of the truth. But you see, they bought all of that crap that Hoover was talking to them about. They ignored Dorothy Kilgallen. They ignored anything like that. And so I say the relevance of looking into the JFK assassination is for people to ask questions, because not enough questions were asked back then. These are true crime murder mysteries of JFK, Marilyn, and Dorothy, but they never should have been.
Exactly.
They never should have been. They weren't mysteries. They just pulled the wool over our eyes, and I was one of them that happened with until I was able to look into all of this.
Ted, you had a second question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, speaking of dynasties, those Dulles brothers, well, the whole family, but John Foster being the Secretary of State, and Allen being the head of the CIA. After he got canned, he was coming back to work every day because he was the man. But what they did to Arbenz in Guatemala was just horrendous,
Yes, it was, and a good question. In Fighting for Justice, and I think it's one of the other books too, Collateral Damage maybe, I have a photograph at LBJ's ranch. And he's standing there, and you remember he was a tall man. He's got on his cowboy boots. He's got a rifle in his hand. I guess he'd been hunting.
Was he wearing a hat?
He's got his cowboy hat on. And next to him, probably not even coming close to be as tall as his shoulder, is Allen Dulles. And I was told by a listener of your program, again, I'm amazed at it, and I thank you for all the tips I've gotten, who said that actually LBJ and Hoover lived close to each other in Washington, D.C., and a frequent visitor to Hoover's home at the time was J. Edgar Hoover.
Amazing. I want you to listen to Russ Baker after we're done, Mark, next hour, my next guest, and just let me know what you think of some of his thoughts.
Happy to do so, yeah.
Let's go next to Carlos in Hawaii on the island of Oahu. Welcome to the program. Hi, Carlos.
Aloha, George.
Hello, my friend.
Hello, Mark.
Hello there.
Mark,
I wish I lived where you do.
It's beautiful. Every day is a beautiful day in Hawaii.
Yes, sir.
Nixon reinvestigation of the assassination, which took place 10 years after in 1973, 1974, where President Nixon put together a task force to reinvestigate the investigation.
Did Nixon ever try to find out about the Kennedy assassination, Mark?
Gee, George, not that I know of, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't recall that. No,
I don't either. Tell me more, Carlos.
It was stated that at the time that President Nixon was planning on recreating the assassination and studying it, and studying all aspects of it.
Oh, you mean planning to it, but he never got to it.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
He had his own problems, Carlos, as you know. So he may have planned to do so, and it's unfortunate that he didn't, because maybe some new evidence would have come from that. Because I hope, researchers in the future will take my research and, they'll get closer to what really happened back then. I'm not saying I'm right about everything. I'm just saying this is the evidence that I've found through my research.
How many players are still alive from the Kennedy assassination time period? Not many.
There's one, and I had to be careful because I had an interview where he was there, and his name is what's his name? Griffin, Bert Griffin. He was an assistant to the Warren Commission. And I was able to prove that he was at that September 18th, 1964 meeting about the dissent. But I was on a program with him, and he said he had no idea of anything about any dissent, never saw any documents, all this other kind of thing. Well, I knew that wasn't true. He's an older man. Out of respect, I didn't say anything there. But other than him, I don't know. All the presidents through the years have not released all the documents, George, because they've said, for instance, that would cause problems with national security, which has never made sense to
exactly.
me. and there are people who are still alive. Well, I don't know who they are. I don't know who it would be that was. There's no Warren Commission members that I know of that are still alive. Other than that, I can't think of anybody either.
Brendan in Austin, Texas is with us. Hey, Brendan, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, guys. George, Mark, interesting. I'll be quick here. LBJ has a lot of skeletons in his closet and is not very well liked at his university. You know, he went to school in San Marcos, Texas, but there's some information that came out in April 2023 called the Box 13 scandal, that in the 1948 U.S. Senate election, apparently LBJ worked with somebody named Luis Salas, who was an election judge, who stuffed 200 ballots into ballot box 13, and these tapes just came back up, and they were able to corroborate the story with all these different people at the time. All the ballot box admissions were in alphabetical order, all the same handwriting, people who hadn't even voted that day. And then the university, there was a lot of people who have been upset at LBJ's history there. So a lot of students take it upon themselves to protest LBJ and the stuff that he did. In 1969, there was a protest that was peaceful, and 10 students got all of their accreditations, all of their school accreditations and transcripts wiped, and the Supreme Court, it even went to the Supreme Court, and they let it happen.
Well, unfortunately, you know, what we've talked about today and what you're talking about there is the main reason why people just don't have much respect for government. It doesn't matter the political party. You know, we're never going to get into that at all. We don't know what they're doing. The transparency isn't there. The cover-ups are not there. You know, it's interesting because I'll go back just a second because of LBJ. Supposedly there was all this evidence, and so it was perfect for him as the president because an awful lot of people would say, well, who had the strongest motive to have eliminated JFK? Well, wait a minute, it would have been LBJ because he became president of the United States. And so he's got to put a commission together with Hoover that is going to block any investigation of anything with him. And one of the ways that you can cover up a murder, I learned this when I was a criminal defense attorney, is by faking the autopsies. There were fake autopsies in Marilyn's death, in JFK's, in Dorothy Kilgallen's, and all of that. For instance, they found 3 barbiturates in Dorothy Kilgallen's blood system after saying that she died of an overdose. Marilyn supposedly suicide. JFK supposedly killed by one man. I mean, you basically can cover up those cases through autopsies. But LBJ was a bad guy, and he knew, by the way, he hated Bobby Kennedy. He knew that probably he was going to be left off the ticket when they ran again. I think that's been pretty well proven, hasn't it, George? They
were talking about that, and that would have devastated his career, to be sure. Mark, we're going to take a short break and come back and take final calls with you in a moment. Mark Shaw with us. He is the first half of our JFK investigation on the 60th anniversary. Well, welcome to our pre-Thanksgiving show. George Norrie with you, along with Mark Shaw. We're taking final calls with Mark. Mark, what was that moment, that aha moment that got you involved in writing about the JFK assassination?
It was when I was working on the book about Melvin Belli, JFK or Jack Ruby's attorney, who I practiced law with Mr. Belli in the 1980s, and I didn't know much about Dorothy at all. And I was interviewing a close friend of Belli's, and he said something about, he knew Dorothy Kilgallen. And I said, well, you mean he was on What's My Line, the television show? Oh, he said, you don't know anything about her at all. And in fact, when she died, Mel said to me, they've killed Dorothy, now they'll go after Jack Ruby. And that was the moment that everything came around, and then I really started looking into J. Edgar Hoover. And in fact, just to round out how Hoover silenced Dorothy Kilgallen, about an hour after she was found dead of the 3 barbiturates, and I have the witness was right there when the FBI raided her office in her home and confiscated all of her JFK files, her documents, a manuscript she was writing, a book she was writing for Random House, and all of that. So he really buttoned up all of those holes that way. But that's what got me going, and I found out that Belli knew J. Edgar Hoover very well. In fact, because both of them bet on the horses at Hollywood Raceway in Los Angeles.
Interesting. And Belli was pretty prominent. How could Ruby afford him?
Well, he couldn't. Here's a compelling source note that I got. The day that, this colleague, J. Kelly Ferris was his name, another lawyer, was with Belli at Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, and a waiter came up and said, listen, you'll never guess what, some guy named Ruby just shot Oswald. And Mr. Ferris said to me, Mark, what he did, he turned around to me and said, oh, well, now I'll have to represent Ruby. So I believe Melvin Belli knew about the assassination. It was kind of on call. Of course, as you know, he shut Ruby's mouth by making him look crazy at trial. Mm-hmm. So all of the holes were filled in except for Dorothy Kilgallen, and that's why she had to die. I say, you want to know how credible she was? Well, they killed her because she knew too much.
Well, he wanted Ruby to plead insanity, and Ruby did not want to do that.
Psychomotor epilepsy insanity defense. And Dorothy, from the front row of that trial, I have a witness who told me that she just shook her head. Everybody shook their head. Nobody understood what that meant, including the jury, which convicted him. You know what's terrible about that in terms of Ruby? She interviewed Ruby. They kind of became friends. She was horrified by what he did. But with Ruby, she noticed that Melvin Belli, during final argument of that case, and Ruby is facing the death penalty, never argued for his life to be saved.
Nope, he never did. And one question about Kilgallen before we take final calls, Mark, that confuses me. She lived in a New York townhouse. She lived with her husband, though they weren't that close. And there was a maid that lived there too, right?
Well, there was a chauffeur, and I guess you could call her a maid, yeah. And I interviewed the daughter of those two people.
Nobody heard anything, or other people
what happened is, I think Hoover found out that Dorothy Kilgallen was going to write this tell-all book for Random House. He couldn't let that happen because she was going to say that he covered up the truth about the assassination, and he would have been indicted. So what does he do? Well, he finds out that Dorothy is having a love affair with a young newspaperman from Ohio, Ron Pataki. And he has his agents find out that Pataki owes a lot of money in gambling debts. They compromise him. And on the last night of her life, she confronts Pataki with having leaked her JFK assassination investigation evidence to the wrong people. They argue about it, and then about 2 hours later, she's found dead in a bed she never slept in. She's got her hairpiece and eyelashes and makeup on and all of that. It's obviously a staged death scene, and so I've been able to prove through Pataki, who wrote a very a compelling and an incriminating poem about the fact that the barbiturates Tulinol, Nembutal, and Seconal were found in a drink that she had a vodka and tonic, and that's how she died. And so the only evidence we have of another man being there that night in the hotel in the townhouse is that Mr. Clement, the butler, heard a man come in with Dorothy and heard them talk as they went up the stairs, and then heard that man leave about half an hour later and go out through the main door. So that's the only evidence we have about that.
Wayne in Tacoma, Washington. Hello, Wayno. Go ahead.
Good evening, gentlemen, George and Mark. I just watched a really interesting interview by an investigative reporter who was having cocktails with Richard Nixon, and he said after a couple, 3 silver bullets, I guess that's a alcoholic drink of strength.
Okay.
He said, "Mr. President, who killed Kennedy?" And Richard Nixon said to him, "Well, the only difference between me and Johnson was I wasn't willing to kill to be president."
Wow.
Oh. Well, LBJ, boy, I'll tell you what. It's just interesting because you look at motive. That's what I always looked at when I was a criminal defense lawyer. I point towards Marcello because that's what Dorothy did. But all of these other suspects, it could be true. The CIA could have been involved in all that. That's why it's just a horror story that the Warren Commission just closed the door on all of those investigations, and they can be looked at now. You can look at the mafia, you can look at the CIA now, but it's not fresh. So we lost that chance. Back, it should have been those investigations, George, should have taken place back in '63 and '64.
Now, if somebody killed Kennedy who was not Marcello, what would the motive be for it? And let's take Johnson out of the picture for a moment, because his motive would have been he gets to be president. But if it wasn't Johnson and if it wasn't Marcello, why do you want John F. Kennedy out as president?
Well, the conjecture is, and I don't believe, and I've looked into it, I don't believe it's been proven. But Johnson got us into the war in Vietnam, correct? Okay.
He was one of those.
Yeah, okay. So what happens? Apparently, and I believe from Morris Wolff, he was telling me, and he was so admired JFK because he told his brother that we're going to get us out of Vietnam. We're going to get us out of Vietnam. Well, you've got to understand that the industrial complex, the military, so on and so forth, that was huge money. You always have to go back to the money, as you know, and find out what's going on. Well, there were millions and millions of dollars that were being poured into Vietnam. So if, in fact, that was true and it was found out by the wrong people who wanted that war to continue, that would have been a serious motive for killing JFK. Do you think that makes sense?
It does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I've never been able to connect that all together. So maybe somebody will be able to do that, or maybe somebody already has, and I don't know about it.
First-time caller Larry in British Columbia in Canada. Welcome to the show. Hi, Larry. Go ahead.
How's it going, you guys?
Good.
I think when Jackie was crawling over the back seat onto the trunk, she must have seen something. Because the most natural thing to do is to go behind the front seat and hide down below on the floorboards.
Well, Larry, what she was looking for was the brain matter. She was in shock, and she was going to try to put the brain matter back into her husband's head.
Jeez, it's so sad.
You've heard that story too, Mark?
Oh, yes, and it's just so sad. If there's any other than JFK, being assassinated, which is the worst, the other victim is Jackie Kennedy. No, their marriage wasn't perfect. No, he ran around on her. No, all that. But if you want to read a compelling book, read one by Caroline Kennedy. And she talks about what it was like with her parents and how JFK, was so wonderful toward her, and Jackie was, and how all the fun they had and everything else like that. I don't know the name of the book, but you can find it because it just talks about all of that. So it was just real sad, and her life was never the same after what happened with JFK, that's for sure.
Have you tried to interview Caroline by any chance?
Yes, I have. I sent her The Reporter Who Knew Too Much through a supporter of mine who knows her husband. I sent her Collateral Damage. I haven't sent her Fighting for Justice, but I never heard anything back except for the fact that in her mind she just can't discuss that. It's too hurtful, and she is just somebody. I think that's why she went the road of Onassis and got herself completely away from anything having to do with the assassination as quick as she could, because we can't imagine how she felt when that happened, and then years after, and she's hearing all the theories and all these kind of things. But that book that she wrote is something that I would suggest to everyone.
Was it She Walks in Beauty, A Woman's Journey Through?
No.
About her mother?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. But anyway, I can get that information for you to Tom. But you'll be able to find it, and it's her recollections. What's the famous journalist who what is it? His name that really wrote about JFK so much. He's the one that interviewed her for that book. Gosh, I can't think of it. Not Salinger, maybe, or something. Anyway, people can look it up.
Yeah, Salinger was Kennedy's PR press secretary.
That's the wrong one then. So, but people can find it. But yeah, I didn't hear from her. But I wanted her to know, and I wrote a long letter to her. I want you to know about Dorothy Kilgallen and what she tried to do to clear up. JFK didn't get justice when he died. There was no real thorough investigation of really what happened because of the Warren Commission. I think one of the most reliable new evidence that's come out is this documentary about what the doctors who were at Parkland Hospital and were trying to save JFK's life say about how different what they saw was what the autopsy was when it was conducted in Washington, D.C. So the cover-ups had started, that moment that J. Edgar Hoover knew he had to protect himself.
Was it the Jack Anderson you're thinking about?
No, unfortunately it's not. Gosh, it's a kind of almost like a coffee table book, and it's a very well-known historian. I'm sorry.
Let's go to Charles in Virginia. Hey, Charles, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Hey, I was asking if you had ever looked into the story behind Rene Dussac. And I'm asking that question because I had a great uncle that worked with JFK in the White House.
Oh.
And he managed the continuity of governance contracts with AT&T. And he said he submitted the report to LBJ after the assassination, presented it to him, that it was Rene Dussac. And I'm asking if you ever looked into that.
That Rene Dussac, if that's her last name, that she did what?
It's Dussaq. It's a book by Robert Wilcox called
Right. But what would she supposedly have done? She wasn't involved in the assassination, or was she?
He was one of the 5 shooters. He was the one that actually orchestrated it. It was a man. It's a man by the name of Rene.
The French guy.
I see. Sorry.
He came from Argentina.
I'm familiar with the name. I have to tell you, and I think I've said this on the program before, I am no expert on all the things that happened in Dealey Plaza. I've never looked into that as much. Dorothy didn't look into that. She thought Oswald was a confusing mess, and she couldn't figure out what was going on. That's why she looked into Ruby. The whole thing with how many bullets and how many shooters and so on and so forth, I don't think that we'll really ever know exactly what went on that day. All I know is if you stand in Dealey Plaza, you can tell that is a death trap. Because and you know what Morris Wolff told me? He told me that his brother had lived in Dallas for 40 years, and he said that his brother said, "Don't let Jack Kennedy come to Dallas because they're going to kill him here." There's no question about that. And Morris Wolff said, we tried to talk the president out of that and also say, don't take the roof off the limousine. So there were a lot of warnings there in terms of what happened. But Dealey Plaza was a death trap, that's for sure.
There was one more writer, I'll throw a name at you, Darwin Payne.
It's not George. Hey, George, I'm getting up there. I'm almost 80 years old. I can't remember some of these things.
How old are you now, Mark?
What's that?
How old are you?
I'm 78. Oh, yeah.
Good for you. You don't sound it. You still sound spry and young.
You'll get a kick out of this, may I tell you. And I guess I'm divulging something, but from my book in 2006 until the new one with Fighting for Justice, the cover photo on the photo on the inside back cover of the books has been the same one that I had taken in 2006. And the other day when I had to renew my driver's license, the woman said, well, we don't need to take a photograph of you because you look the same as you did back in 2006.
I love it.
So I guess I've done something wrong. And people, of course, have always said I look like John Denver. So, I'm in good shape. I'm very blessed, George, and I'm blessed to know you.
All right, my friend, keep in touch with us. And if you have some time, listen to the next couple hours with Russ Baker. I'd be curious to get your thoughts.
That author's name right now. Thank you.
All right, my friend. Mark Shaw with us. Up next, Russ Baker, the investigative reporter and journalist. We'll get his side.